So the last thing just to cover is some very broad steps, okay? And I want to be clear about this. This is some very broad steps in going about how you would go about designing or building a compensation plan. It's not a family employment hiring policy, but it's just how you go about designing a general compensation plan. And these are pretty broad steps. I mean, when you actually get down to it, there would be some further details that you would want to sort out. So the first thing is really looking at, got to figure out what your compensation philosophy is, because that's really going to dictate and drive all the other terms and conditions that you're going to set. Obviously, we talked about earlier, a market approach tends to be the best practice in that area. Okay. Secondly, it would be looking at what is the market value for specific jobs or roles in that area, and in that capacity, you're just trying to get some general benchmarking as to how much is, if I were to move this job to another company, what would somebody be willing to pay for that? Mary, I didn't forget your point about, there's certainly some overlap, and you're never going to get a fine, a precise number, but it's usually fair market value is often what people are willing to accept at the end of the day. Third, just evaluating the role of either some annual or long-term incentives and how they would play in any sort of plan. Do you want to have those? Do you want to have some short-term incentives, long-term incentives, a mix of both, none? And then just establishing some specific criteria for job and company performance. So this is really getting some job descriptions in place, right? And figuring out, of those incentives, what is it that I have to do from my position, and what does the company have to do in order for me to meet some of those incentive payouts. And then lastly, big thing is just communicating the general philosophy and the plan. So if we talked about this, the philosophy is what's going to drive our further decisions. And you can have in your philosophy any one of these other means. Obviously, the market value is the recommended way to go. Evaluating market value. So after you come up with what are the different jobs and positions, it's now trying to figure out what is the fair market value pay. And so how do you go about finding what's fair market value? Well, there's a variety of ways you can go about it, right? If you have information that would let you understand what your competition is paying people, right? That's one area. There's certainly salary surveys that are published, or you can subscribe to get some feedback on those. What you have to watch with the salary surveys, though, is making sure that you're in the right industry, you're in the right region, right? It doesn't do us any good to start benchmarking our employees against what people would be paid in New York City or Los Angeles, right? Or Arkansas, for that matter, right? You can also, this is where making use of an outside board or some sort of outside compensation advisor can also help design what that market value is. And from that, you need to look to see whether or not your philosophy is going to tie into paying above market rates, below market rates, at market or at market rates. We'll see a lot of companies designing, when they design positions, they'll then attach a low, mid, and high range for those ranges. And usually you'll have a threshold of maybe, if the median is $100,000 for that position, the entry level pay would be 20% below that, or 80,000, and the real experienced high-performing pay at that level would be 20% above. So you have now a range of somewhere between 80 to 120,000 as what that market value for that particular position would be. Role 3 is just evaluating the role of incentives, right? And this is going to be tied into the performance of the company and the employee. So you have to make some decisions here about who's going to participate in that, to what degree of participation, short or long term, and then a little safeguard in here is also putting in maybe some levels of minimums or even maximums to just help protect that you're not overpaying in a really good year and you don't have any capital to kind of continue you moving forward in some future years of growth, or if you have some other projects that you want to embark on in the future. Next, you would just look to establish some sort of performance criteria, right? And that's both at the company level and also at the individual level. And the company criteria would be more specific metrics that can be tied into either industry or just the company's own goals. So if industry says that our profit margins are 35%, but our internal goal is to be at 40%, then that's where you would be setting some of the benchmarking in relation to some of those company goals. And then with the employee criteria, right, here's where we're talking about setting specific goals for that person. If it's a salesperson, maybe it's a certain number of sales that you want them to achieve. If it's somebody in more of an operational role, are there certain projects or tasks that you wanted to accomplish during the upcoming year that you would be willing to pay some incentives for? Could be reworking the layout of the warehouse or something like that. All right. And lastly, the final thing is to just communicate this to everyone involved. And this can be through a series of different ways of communication, right? It can be on individual one-on-one meetings. It could be staff meetings. Maybe there's something at more of an executive level. And certainly in the family business setting, we'd have, if there's family meetings, just communicate what those different policies would be.